you stop and let you jump in here.
First of all, thanks a lot. You are so positive. I'm kind of an optimist too. You're an optimist about direct democracy and that the people will hold the legislature's feet to the fire, and that we just need to get people, active to demand this thing that everybody wants. I don't know anybody that wants this that's not in this room. My friends on Facebook want more government benefits, and they want the rich people to pay more, and they want a $15 minimum wage.
No.
I just don't share your optimism about the direct democracy.
Okay, well you must have been tainted by living too close to Boulder. That's the problem. That's Disneyland. That's not the real world there. You have to understand that this is, I served on our tax commission in Colorado, and we held hearings all over the state. And I can tell you, once you get out of Boulder is the only hearing we had where people stood up and said, I want to pay more taxes. Only in Boulder. We would go out to these little towns, Ede, Colorado, I think it was, and we held these hearings. And the farmers would come in and talk to us about fiscal policies in Edes. And I loved their stories. They said, well, the city decided they wanted to build a new jail and office building, and they were going to raise sales taxes 5% to build this, and they put it on the ballot, which is you have to do under Tabor. We have direct democracy. They turned it down. A year or two later, they came back with a smaller sales tax increases, scaled down jail and office building, turned it down again. A couple of years later, they came back with a bare bones jail and bare bones office in an office building and a 1% sales tax. And that one passed. And what those farmers said is, if we raise sales taxes in this community 5%, we would lose our businesses. The farmers would just go down the road to Kansas somewhere and buy their feed and stuff. People get it. We did surveys, polling of people's attitudes toward Tabor. More people support Tabor now than when Tabor passed in 1992 by a huge margin. The reason is, we've lived with Tabor now for a couple of decades, and people like these fiscal limits that constrain spending. They like getting rebates. They like a stringent limit on spending. But you got to get down to that level. You have to have citizens' input. Let the citizens decide. You're going to be greatly surprised if you get the problem now is you don't have a choice. In many cases, in most states, you don't have the kind of power we have in Colorado, and you certainly don't have any power over what Congress does. Yes.
What about some pertinent questions that we might put to the people that are running for office now? They say, well, what do you do about this? And all slanted along these lines.
Ask them this question. The nation has a fiscal crisis, unconstrained deficits, debt, $17 trillion in debt. What are you going to do about it? And if they don't have an answer, tell them you better get an answer if you want my vote.
So too rich. Yeah.
Well, by the way, one of the interesting things about that argument, did you notice that revenue line on that graph was flat? That revenue has been about 17% plus or minus 1 or 2% for the last 50 years. We've had all sorts of tax rates all the way back in the 50s. We had 75, 80% marginal tax rates. Back then it was still, that was how much revenue. We cut that to in half under Reagan, and we generate the same amount of revenue. I helped design our flat rate tax in Colorado back in the late 80s. We generated more revenue with our flat rate income tax than we did with the old graduated rate. Incentives matter. You cut people's tax rates, you create incentives for productive activity. So this idea that the idea that we can solve this problem by raising taxes, even if you tried to raise tax rates, you're not going to generate revenue by raising tax rates because people are rational. People make rational choices about where they work, how much they work, what kind of work they do, when they retire, whether they take all sorts of ways to circumvent a high marginal tax rate. So that's not a solution.
Dr. Poulson, first, thank you very much for being here. It's been quite an education. I'm interested to know if you've given several countries who were examples of success in changing their economic viewpoint about deficits and spending and incomes. Do you have any examples of countries that just plain didn't get it and failed? Because we're on that path. And how do we give an example to our own legislators, to our own citizens that say, these are countries that made a change and succeeded by doing A, B, and C, and these are countries that didn't, and this is what happened?
Well, of course, in just a few years ago, we had the best example, and that's Greece. I mean, Greece basically failed to constrain their spending. They allowed their deficits and debt to reach a point where they did default on their debt. Argentina is basically this year has defaulted on its debt. And the reason is they pursued lousy fiscal policies. They can't constrain spending. And I always love to compare California and Colorado. Or better yet, Illinois. Illinois is close to bankruptcy. Illinois has hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of unfunded liability. And my friends in the legislature say there are times they can't pay their bills. Just like anybody else that goes bankrupt, they defer payments and do all sorts of gimmicky things. And we already have examples of municipalities that have defaulted on their debt. I think in your lifetime and mine, we're going to see a state like Illinois basically say at some point, no mas, we can't pay our bill. California might reach that point. So I always contrast, look at the growth in Colorado compared to the stagnating California economy. A lot of it's fiscal policy or failed fiscal policy. Yeah.
So I have a Keynesian economist friend, and recently posted something about how it's ridiculous that there's people that still think that a country can't run perpetually high deficits and debt and then print money to finance that debt. What would be your response to that Keynesian position? I mean, aside from the nonsense about the long run we're all dead, what would be your response to someone who makes such a claim? Why is it that this is not sustainable even over the long run?
Well, I think there's a huge literature out there now on why debt leads to this kind of economic stagnation. Some of the best studies that were conducted by the OECD, and the OECD projected, they basically say once your debt gets above 60% of GDP, you have problems, and you better be, that's above a tolerable level in terms of a sustainable policy. And one of the interesting things they did was to estimate how much fiscal consolidation do different countries have to pursue, that is, reducing deficits and debt, to get that debt level down below that tolerable level. And they classified countries. There are some countries that are in good shape that don't have debt ratios like Switzerland, for example. There are other countries that face serious problems. I mean, it's going to take a major effort. They identified, as I recall, 5 countries that have not made any efforts to address this problem, and countries where it's going to take a huge effort of fiscal consolidation to get their debt below that level. And it includes, not surprisingly, Japan, the United States, Great Britain, Spain. And the problem is these are countries where, whereas these other OECD countries have now decades of experience with fiscal constraints and fiscal rules, we've done nothing. And they look at this projection and they're saying, okay, if your debt ratio is already up in that astronomical area, what's it going to take to get it down below 60%? We are one of the weakest countries in the world in terms of meeting these types of fiscal requirements for sustainability. Now, problems with Keynesians is Keynes told these people, well, in the long run, you're all dead anyway, so don't worry about the long run. Just worry about the business cycle. And there are people who really believe that. And it's true. If you ignore the future, you can. You're all doing okay, right? Obama say, hey, we're doing okay. I'm doing better. Looks like this year we did a little better on health care or something. Got to look at the long run. You can't ignore the long run. The future counts. Keynesians don't have a clue about the future. They don't have a clue, I don't think, about the business cycle, but they sure don't have a clue about the long run. Yes?
I guess mine is more of a sociological question. So
Theological question?
Sociological. So you brought up about Greece, and having recently been there and seeing the attitude of the people there and the dwindling infrastructure, and they know they're kind of up a creek without a paddle, but everyone somehow still walks around with the sense of entitlement. So in the sense of, yes, you are in fact drowning, how do you convince them to save their own lives?
I missed the last part of what you said there.
If they know they're drowning, how do you convince them to save their own lives?
Well,
because I see that happening here, but to a lesser extent.
I think what's happened in Greece is it is part of the European Union. And the European Union has, for about the last half decade, mandated all of these countries, you have to meet these requirements. And of course, they have some clout because they have loans and they can extend loans. And if you don't meet these fiscal requirements, we're not going to bail you out. And so the Greek people may say, oh, the hell with it, we're not going to worry about it. What the European Union is saying is, you better get your fiscal house in order, or you can't be part of the European Union, you can't be part of the monetary union, and then Greece is really in trouble. I mean, if they can't participate in that bigger common market, then, I mean, I don't know what's left there. Not much.
It was interesting because they still have the we deserve free school and we deserve free this, and at any given point the unions are striking for some reason or another, and it was just interesting to contrast it.
Well, there are a lot of people in this country who think that we can provide free education, free health care, free whatever. There's always an opportunity cost.
So I've been trying really hard to be optimistic about everything you're saying here. I wanted to ask a really negative question, which is, okay, let's pass a constitutional amendment, name one of the first 10 Bill of Rights that isn't being violated all the time as it is. But I realized what I really should say is that we escaped California a couple of years ago, moved here to Colorado, and everything you're saying about the difference between California and Colorado is totally true, only more so. It really feels like we moved into a whole new world here. And I don't know how to say anything better than that in a short amount of time, but you're absolutely right to make that contrast.
Yeah, I helped work on Tabor, and I helped design some of the fiscal rules we have here in Colorado. And
Thank you.
well, and I watched how citizens thank John Andrews and some other people for that. But I think Colorado citizens get it. I think that we observe how important it is, just like our own budgets and our families, how important it is for the state to pursue prudent fiscal policies, and that perhaps the only way to make sure that happens is to impose this kind of constitutional limit on spending. And as you know, what Tabor says is if you want to raise debt, if you want to raise taxes, you have to go to the ballot box and you have to get citizen approval. And Colorado citizens have been voting on this. It's interesting, by the way, how direct democracy works in this country. When they have these ballot issues at the very local level, for example, you have to have a ballot issue at the district level. Those pass about 90% of the time. And the reason is this. When a district here, for example, a fire district or a library district says we need to borrow money for a fire truck or for a library, people can observe that, they can hold them accountable, and they'll vote for that. When you move to the municipal level, people have less confidence that the municipal governments, I think your municipal government's a good example maybe there, they're less sensitive to what the citizens want. There's less accountability, there's less control. And so when they put these ballot measures out there, they fail about half the time. At the state level, they've been trying to raise our taxes now for 2 decades, and the only taxes they've raised so far are cigarette taxes. And they've been trying to get rid of Tabor for decades now. Every other year there's some new, let's get rid of Tabor. Let's go back to the old progressive income tax.
But they did.
Citizens.
Isn't C&D significantly weak in Tabor?
What happened is that at that point they did change the Tabor limit so that the Tabor limit grows every year at the rate of inflation and population growth. Prior to that, the Tabor limit grew at the rate of the previous level of spending times inflation. That's called the ratchet down. And they've eliminated the ratchet down, and that did weaken Tabor. The fact is we still have Tabor in place. We still limit government spending to inflation and population growth. You still vote on taxes. You still vote on debt. And you can decide what kind of government you want and how much you're willing to pay for it.
But Denver just de-Bruced. They voted direct democracy to kick Tabor out the door in the city and county of Denver. So when you cite direct democracy as a positive, I have to point out that the liberal enclaves of any society are going to keep voting for gimme, gimme, gimme as long as I don't have to do it.
Oh, absolutely. They're relentless. They're going to come back at you year after year, and they're going to try to de-Bruce their limit at the local level, and they've done that successfully. At the state level, they have not. They've tried that. They have not.
At the state level, they're passing fees instead of taxes.
Well, there is a problem in the sense that there is an incentive for legislators to rely more on fees than taxes, and that's happened to some extent. Look at on balance, though, what the total effect of Tabor has been, and compare spending in this state with California or virtually any other state. And as I say, especially at the state level, Tabor's a big deal. At the local level, you're right. They have in some special interests, in some local districts, school districts, and so forth, they've been able to eliminate the constraints.
All politics is local.
Well, what I would suggest you take a different story, and that is, okay, this is not perfect, right? This is not the end all of all fiscal rules, but it's a pretty good one. It's the most stringent fiscal rule in the country.
Speaking of not perfect, I have a question about the Ryan budget. Correct me if I heard you incorrectly. Did I hear that there is a mandate on every citizen purchasing health care in the Ryan budget?
Every citizen would be required to have private health insurance.
So it's mandated by the federal government that the individual purchase a product.
And that you would get a tax credit to offset the cost.
When the Republicans do it, but not okay when the Democrats do it?
No, I think what he's saying is the present system is one where businesses can get a tax credit for offering their employees health insurance. The flaw in that is it creates third parties. They're making all.
The flaw is force, though. The flaw is the federal government forcing me to purchase anything.
What I'm saying is that we're looking at a very imperfect system today with what I would regard as a significantly improvement over that, because currently if you don't have health insurance, if your employer doesn't offer health insurance, and you go out and buy health insurance, there's no tax break, there's no tax credit. It's completely biased towards the offering of health insurance through employers, and that involves the negotiation of employers and health insurance companies and so on. We think from a standpoint of individual liberty and choice, it's much better to have individuals making these choices. And if you're going to
not to buy it.
Pardon?
I choose not to buy it.
What if I can't afford it?
Yeah, the purpose of tax policy is not.
Well, then
It's not.
the problem with that
government.
is the third rider problem, the free rider problem. And that is, if you could tell me.
Now you're you're getting into social contract theory, and that's
No, let me just finish. Let me finish. Okay, let's say everybody in this room, we go out and we buy our health insurance, and we pay the cost. And some of us might like a more expensive insurance plan where we'll pay a little bit more. Some of us might buy a less expensive insurance plan, but we're going to buy an insurance plan, and we end up with a catastrophic illness that costs, and that's, by the way, not that unusual. It costs millions of dollars. Talk to your friends about having an operation today.
If the federal government
Let me finish my story, and then I'll let you talk. I understand. I like controversy, but you got to let me answer your question. That's the polite way to do it. So, we end up in the hospital with this catastrophic illness, millions of dollars, and we have a health insurance that covers that. Okay. You say, I choose not to buy health insurance.
Because I have cash to pay for my own health care.
All I'm saying is, if you as an individual choose not to buy insurance, and you show up, and let's say if you're a multimillionaire, more power to you. There are a lot of people in this country who are not multimillionaires. They show up in the emergency room, and they have a $1 million operation, and they can't pay for it. Who pays for it? All the rest of it. So there's a free rider problem here, and I have a solution for that you may or may not like. I suppose if we had doctors who would say the person comes into the emergency room with this catastrophic illness that's going to cost millions of dollars, and they show up without health insurance, I guess the doctor could say, well, we're going to let that person die. I don't think that's a good solution either. So I understand your libertarian position on this, and I'm sympathetic to it.
It's not a libertarian. It's an individual rights solution. Operations wouldn't cost $1 million if the government weren't deeply involved in the regulation of the medical industry. I'm not talking about insurance aside. I'm talking about what doctors can and can't do based on government.
That's
the purpose of the government is to protect individual rights, and everything that you're talking about has nothing to do with that. So
the question you're asking is an empirical question, and that is, do catastrophic illnesses cost $1 million? Well,
let's go over here. We have a question over here from Russ.
You mentioned that Switzerland had an 85%. What did you say? There was the referendum on making those rules.
Yeah, the debt break was approved by 85% of the population in the referendum.
So that seems to me then that you need a significant population groundswell or persuasion in that direction. You're not going to give I understand your optimism, but you would have to have just pretty much a similar feeling within the. Do you think that 85% of the citizens of the U.S. are interested?
When we put Tabor on the ballot, people predicted it would never pass, right? Roy Romer said, Tabor will kill Colorado, and we'll see people fleeing the state. They'll be leaving the state in droves.
We didn't hear the question.
The question is, well, he's talking.
Somebody else was talking.
We still listening.
A couple of separate debates, separate controversies there. The question is, how do you generate this level of support? And all I can tell you is, it took us a couple ballots, but we got Tabor passed. It took us 3 different ballot measures, but in 1992 we had a majority, and we have a larger majority of people supporting Tabor now than we had in 1992. You get to the people and you present them with these choices. I'm optimistic that citizens will make the right choices because we've done it, and we've observed the outcome of that.
Where are you getting you said more people supported now. Is that just an anecdotal observation, or do you actually have a poll? Or?
Yeah, we had, Cerulli did a poll for us when I served on the tax commission, and they asked people, what do you think about Tabor? And would you favor Tabor? Do you think it's right for for a fiscal rule to limit spending to inflation and population growth? Do you think that citizens should vote on taxes? Do you think that citizens should vote on debt? Do you think that, is Tabor a good law? Virtually, on all of those questions, a supermajority voted in favor.
And why was, I've only been in Colorado for 14 years. Why was the state legislature able to gut Tabor or limit it? Why was that not found unconstitutional by the state Supreme Court?
Well, the special interests are going to fight this tooth and nail and continue to fight it. And if they can find a loophole, they're going to take it to the Supreme Court. And if you have a stupid Supreme Court justices like we have, unfortunately, they uphold a lot of these loopholes. So it's not a perfect rule, and it's not the perfect outcome, and it doesn't solve all the problems of the world. It doesn't solve the problems in Denver, maybe. I don't know, but it's better than what we had before. That's all I can tell you. We need to redistribute income. We need to do all these. We have a better plan. We have a better plan for our society that's consistent with our individual freedom, individual responsibility, which is what the Constitution says.
So I'm going to exercise founder's privilege. I get the last question. And we'll wrap it up. So more of a public choice question then, that what I'm picking up from you is that direct democracy seems to be a better check on special interests than the parliamentary or representative democracy process. Would that be a fair way to characterize your position?
Yeah, and just briefly, that's an interesting contrast between Sweden and Switzerland. In Switzerland, their debt brake is in the Constitution. It is protected by the Constitution. In Sweden, they rely more on parliamentary democracy, and they have had success because at the beginning of every budget cycle in Sweden, they agree on a budget constraint. This is our fiscal rule. It says that we can only spend this much. Now let's figure out how to spend within that budget constraint. But there are rumblings in Sweden now from special interests who are trying to evade that rule and try to sort of, do all the log rolling and stuff that leads to higher spending. So I think that's why the direct democracy route, which especially if you can incorporate this in your fiscal rules in the Constitution, it's a better long-run solution. And Colorado's the best example of that.
Thank you very much.